We are the Radicals. I'm Vanda McCormick, and my radical is David Walker. I'm accompanied by Yaela Goldblatt, who has researched Harriet Beecher Stowe. These two radicals lived in the late 18th century to early 19th century. They came from very different backgrounds, however they both accomplished some of the same things. Both were fighting for equal rights for all humans, and were able to publish books that expressed their thoughts and helped guide many Americans who may have felt helpless at the time. There were many things going on here in America and the rest of the world that ultimately had an impact on slavery here in the United States. The Haitian Revolution was something that America wasn't directly involved in, but which had an inspirational effect on slaves and other groups discriminated on here in America. The Haitian Revolution was a successful anti-slavery revolt that lasted from 1791 until 1804. Self-liberated slaves destroyed slavery at home and fought to preserve their freedom. This is why some historians say that the Haitian Revolution influenced slave rebellions in the United States and British colonies. The biggest slave revolt in U.S. history was the 1811 German Coast Uprising in Louisiana. The slave rebellion was put down, and the punishment the slaves received was so severe that no contemporary news reports about it exist. Around the time David Walker was born, the cotton gin had been invented by Eli Whitney. The cotton gin is a machine that made it easier and quicker to separate cotton fiber from the seeds. With this new invention, growth in the production of cotton in the United States concentrated mostly in the South. Cotton production expanded from 750,000 bales in 1830 to 2.8 million bales in 1850. As a result, the regime became even more dependent on plantations and slavery, with plantation agriculture becoming the largest sector of its economy. The number of slaves rose in concert with increase in cotton production, increasing from 700,000 in 1790 to around 3.2 million in 1850. The Slave Act of 1794 also had a pressing effect on slavery here in America. The Slave Trade Act of 1794 was a law passed by the United States Congress that limited American involvement in the trade of human cargo. It was the first of several acts of Congress that eventually outlawed the importation of slaves to the United States. These and many other things affected slavery in America during the beginning of David Walker's life. These historical events shaped the world around him and would later impact his life. David Walker was born in 1796 in North Carolina to a free black mother and an enslaved black father. At the time, state laws granted freedom based upon the status of the mother, so since his mother was free, Walker was born free as well. Even though the law said he was free, that didn't stop Walker from witnessing firsthand the many injustices of slavery. After growing up in the South, Walker could no longer bear to see his fellow African Americans be mistreated the way they were in the South. So Walker traveled throughout the country, eventually settling in Boston. But even in that free northern city, life was less than ideal for black residents. In Boston, Walker began to associate with prominent black activists. He joined institutions that denounced slavery in the South and discrimination in the North. He became involved with the nation's first African American newspaper, the Freedom Journal, out of New York City, which he frequently contributed to. By the end of 1828, he became Boston's leading spokesperson against slavery. Walker's most notable contribution was his pamphlet titled Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World. The publication was a result of years of research he had done on topics such as history, sociology, philosophy, and theology. Its message was directed to slaves and to all Africans throughout the world who were in bondage. Walker's pamphlet called for the immediate and universal emancipation of blacks throughout the world. Southern states were quick to respond to the appeal's publication. Some states passed legislation that made distribution of it illegal. Other states passed laws prohibiting slaves from being taught to read. In addition to the enactment of laws, a $10,000 reward was offered for Walker, either dead or alive. Walker's actions changed the tone and aims of the abolition movement. Most abolitionists had sought the gradual phasing out of slavery, but Walker declared that the institution was a scourge and that required immediate elimination. And instead of supporting the return of free slaves to Africa, he believed that every African American had the right to be a full and equal citizen of the United States. Many took to his ideas after reading his pamphlet, which is what scared Southern slave owners. The spread of his pamphlet feared Southern slave owners because it empowered slaves and gave them hope for a change. His fiercely argued views would affect and inspire others for years to come.
During the 1800s, American territory and states were rapidly expanding. In addition, the first edition of the Webster Dictionary was published. Another event which occurred in the early 1800s was the War of 1812 between the United States and Britain. But more importantly, the ownership of slaves is gradually increasing. Also, the importation of slaves is now outlawed, although there are still slaves illegally imported into the country. Harriet Beecher Stowe was born on June 14, 1811, in Litchfield, Connecticut. She was part of a large religious family. Her father was a reverend. Frequently, she lived with relatives following her mother's sudden death when she was just 5 years old. This left a great impact on her. She and her siblings were encouraged by their parents to make an impact on the world. One of the most important influential events in Harriet Beecher Stowe's life was during 1820 with the introduction of the slave controversy. This was a political debate regarding the state of Missouri, which is a newly found state. The debate was between the state to be a slave state or a free state. It was greatly debated among all the other states in the United States, both northern and southern. Harriet's father was against a slave state and forcefully preached his views to his congregation, hoping they would believe him and agree. Harriet was deeply moved by this message. She would ask herself, is slavery a good thing? Harriet Beecher Stowe's main education was achieved through two schools, Litchfield Female Academy and Hartford Female Academy. Both schools were among the few strictly for young women during this time. The subjects taught to the young women consisted of male-oriented fields. Through this, she developed a love of writing and literature while attending the school in Hartford. Her passion for writing enabled her to voice her personal opinions when she became a writer. While she was teaching in Cincinnati, she met Calvin Ellis Stowe, another teacher. They were married on January 6, 1836. Together they had 7 children. During this time, she began to write the novels which would bring her fame. The first novel Harriet Beecher Stowe published was Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1851. The main focus of the novel was to depict slavery in America. The inspiration for her novel was the passing of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850. Much of the novel included tales from former slaves, but in addition, she had somewhat of a personal connection with the death of her infant son. She described it as the pain she felt a mother would experience when losing her child to slavery. Uncle Tom's Cabin would be the most well-known novel she ever wrote. theme of anti-slavery was commonly found in Stowe's novels. Through this, she hoped to bring awareness to the public about slavery, with the treatment they experienced in the areas with high slave population. She gathered a widespread number of followers through this, largely because she was a woman writing about this during that era. She even gained President Lincoln's attention after the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin. There's a legend that the two met in 1862, and he said to her, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." He was referring to the war on slavery. The majority of Harriet Beecher Stowe's life was spent in Connecticut. Her writing career spanned 5 decades, publishing more than 30 manuscripts. She died on July 1st, 1896 in Hartford, Connecticut. Even today, her novels have been very influential for educational settings as well as historians. They provide another example of slavery in America during the 1800s. Though they were fictionalized, readers can imagine the real treatment of slaves through her novels, using the true stories of former slaves that Stowe incorporated. An example found from pop culture that I connected with Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, was found in the musical The King and I. During the story, Uncle Tom's Cabin was compared with slavery in the palace in 1862, Siam, now called Thailand. The idea of Uncle Tom's Cabin was reflected throughout the story.
Both these radicals became famous writers and activists. Harriet Beecher Stowe was fighting more so for women's rights, but human rights nonetheless. David Walker was fighting for free blacks here in America and throughout the world, and both are greatly infected by the world they grew up in and also left an impact on the world that they left. Without these two radicals, history would not be the same, and we as women and we as African Americans would not be where we are today with the equal rights we have here in America.